Hey guys, tonight we journey back, way back, to the sizzling stone plains of ancient Egypt. The sun is brutal, the work is endless, and you are a pyramid laborer with sand in your teeth and a clay beer mug in your hand. You're surrounded by shouting overseers, clattering chisels, and the low hum of sweat drenched chants drifting over limestone blocks the size of a camel. There are no hard hats, no unions, yet, but you're part of something massive, something sacred, something backbreaking. You might think you're here to build a monument to eternity. Truth is, you're mostly just trying to survive the week without getting crushed, cursed, or served watered down beer. And trust me, if the heat doesn't get you, the rations will. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is over there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The dust kicks up before dawn. You trudge out of a woven reed hut, feet raw from yesterday's haul, and squint toward the rising sun. The Giza plateau is already buzzing. You hear the donkeys bray, feel the ground thrum with the rhythm of hammers striking stone. You don't have a coffee mug. You've got a ceramic jar of beer, thick as soup, and just barely cold from the overnight breeze. And yes, this is breakfast. You gulp it down, warm and grainy, and pretend not to notice the floating barley chunks. It doesn't taste good, but it hits like fuel. You're one of thousands. Specialists, apprentices, cooks, potters, brewers, rope weavers. You're not a slave, not quite. You're mobilized labor. A temporary recruit to the greatest building project on earth, drafted from your village to live here for months. Paid in onions, garlic, and beer. About 4 liters a day, if the scribes like you. Today's task, ramp hauling. You and your crew are part of the pulley chain, dragging 2-ton limestone blocks up a sloped causeway. It's not glamorous. It's not even spiritual. You pull rope, grunt, swear, and occasionally dodge a goat. At the top of the ramp, an overseer with a polished reed staff yells something about divine deadlines. You briefly fantasize about turning his staff into firewood. The block lands with a thud. The vibration rolls through your bones like thunder in the Nile Delta. You wipe your forehead with a rag that was once a tunic and reach for the ladle in your side pouch. Beer break. Again. This isn't a treat. It's how you keep going. The camp's philosophy is simple. Bricks for beer. Fall behind on your quota. Rations get cut. Work faster. They might throw in a date or a clove of garlic. One guy 3 shifts over claims he once earned a fig. You think he's lying. Nearby, a drummer taps a slow beat to keep teams in sync. You hum along. It sounds almost like a lullaby, if lullabies came with the smell of hot limestone and sweaty feet. Now, here's the wild part. Historians say that Egypt had some of the most organized labor crews in the ancient world. Your team even has a name, the Drunkards of Menkaure. You take a weird pride in it. Still, things aren't perfect. The overseers bark more than they guide. The beer's been thinner lately, and the last time someone complained, the scribe pretended to misplace their ration record. Suspicious? A little. You've seen workers fake injuries just to avoid the ramps. One guy tied a rock to his ankle and claimed he got cursed by a priest. It almost worked. You trudge on. The midday sun makes the stones shimmer like molten silver. You wrap your headcloth tighter, squint, and count the blocks. Still 12 to go. You try to zone out. Let the rhythm lull you. That's when you notice something odd. The beer ladle you passed feels lighter than usual. You slosh it, frown. Definitely more foam than brew. You glance at your buddy, a guy named Seti, with arms like an ox. He tilts his jaw. Short again, he mutters. Third time this week. You both look toward the overseer station. No one's watching. But in the distance, the scribes are scribbling, ink flowing on papyrus scrolls thicker than your dinner stew. Something's off. A wind gust kicks up grit. You spit sand, take a breath, and brace for the afternoon haul. But your brain itches with suspicion. Rations don't shrink for no reason. Someone's either cutting corners or cutting your supply. And that, friend, is how revolutions start. The sun climbs higher as the pyramid's white stone facade begins to glow, blinding, like a second sun bounced back at you. The rope's grooves cut deeper into your calloused palms. Every pull jars your shoulder. Every breath feels baked. You lose count of how many times you've hauled blocks today. But none of that matters now. Your mind is stuck on the beer. You're supposed to get 2 ladles in the morning, 2 at midday, and 2 more at dusk. It's the rhythm of your life, your body's timetable, your reward system. Miss a dose, and things get tense. You trudge into the shade of the workers' village at noon, feet kicking up puffs of red sand. The smell of yeast, onions, and something vaguely burnt drifts from the cooking tents. Your stomach grumbles in protest. Inside your crew's tent, more of a patchwork hut with palm fronds for a roof, Seti's already complaining. They're thinning it, he says, swishing his mug around. I can see through it. This isn't beer. It's barley tea. You flop onto a mat, too tired to answer. A potter named Irie sits nearby, dunking bread in a bowl. You should have seen my brother's ration, he mutters. Could have passed it off as river water. Someone else chuckles from the back. Better than that one week, we got it sour. Remember that smell? A chorus of groans follows. Even the beer jokes are getting stale. You lift your own clay mug and take a sip. It's sour, all right. Barely fermented, watery, and warm. You resist the urge to spit it back out. The grain husks cling to your teeth like guilt. Could be the brewers are just overworked, someone offers. Could be the scribes are shaving from the top, Seti counters. Could be the gods are punishing us, Irie adds helpfully. Could be my face punishes somebody soon, Seti growls. You all laugh. But there's a strange quiet afterward. The scribes, perched high on their platforms with ink-stained fingers, control everything. They're the middlemen between your aching back and the Pharaoh's divine plans. They keep the records, measure the grain, approve the rations, and most importantly, track your beer. They don't sweat. They don't lift. But they always know. Or pretend to. One of your crewmates claims he saw a scribe slip into the brewer's tent last night with a basket of dates. Bribery? Private trade? It's hard to tell. But your ration didn't lie. It was weak. And beer isn't just refreshment, it's everything. You eat your bread dry if beer isn't there to soak it. You can't rest without it. It signals shift changes, it dulls muscle pain. Some even whisper it wards off bad spirits if you pour a few drops before sleeping. And for all that, the brew you're drinking today wouldn't scare a single ghost. Seti leans back and stares at the tent ceiling. You think Pharaoh knows? You scoff. Pharaoh thinks the pyramids build themselves. It's an exaggeration, of course, but only slightly. Pharaoh doesn't visit the work sites. His royal cartouches are carved in the limestone, sure, but the closest he's come to this labor camp is probably the distance between 2 sun gods on a temple wall. Instead, you're managed by a dozen layers of foremen, scribes, priests, and bureaucrats, each one making just enough decisions to pass the blame if things go wrong. Still, someone's messing with the beer. Seti stands and stretches his back, bones cracking like dry papyrus. We should go to the brewer's. Irie snorts. And say what? Excuse me, sacred barley men, our pints are sad? But Seti's already halfway out the tent flap. You follow? Because why not? You've got 10 minutes until the next shift bell, and if nothing else, maybe you'll get another sip. The brewery is a cluster of sun-baked clay buildings near the river. It smells like wet grain and ambition. Giant vats of foamy beer bubble inside, stirred with long wooden paddles by bare-chested brewers with gold amulets and short tempers. A young brewer glances up. We're not open. We're not begging, Seti replies. We're working. He gestures at the ladle strapped to his belt, the universal sign of rationed labor. The brewer frowns but doesn't stop stirring. We're getting light pours, you add. More foam than brew. Talk to the scribes, he says, still stirring. We just brew what we're told. Who tells you how much to thin it? Seti presses. Silence, just for a moment. Then, no one thins it. A pause. Then, not officially? You exchange a look with Seti. That's confirmation enough. Outside, the air has gone still. The sun has lost its golden shine, turning white and angry. Back toward the ramp, a foreman's voice rises in irritation. You know that tone. Someone's block was late. You turn back to the brewer. Tell your boss we're watching. So are the gods. The brewer's smirk fades a bit. On your way back to the work site, Seti whispers, You think this is how revolts start? You smirk. Number. But it's definitely how rumors start. And those? They spread faster than beer evaporates in a clay jar. That night, as the sun sinks like a glowing coin into the Nile, you lie in your mat again, sore, sticky, and uneasy. The stars come out, but sleep doesn't. Not yet. In a nearby tent, someone's whispering too loudly. Said there was enough grain, but the priests kept the rest. Heard a team walked off the job last month near Saqqara. They say if you stop hauling, the gods don't punish you. The overseers do. You close your eyes. The beer still tastes thin. And something thick is beginning to brew in the camp air. Not barley, not yeast. Something slower, stronger. Suspicion. The next morning begins as usual. If usual means being shouted awake by a man with no eyebrows, one sandal, and a terrifying amount of energy for someone holding a bronze whip. You groan, roll off your mat, and step into the light like a sandblasted mummy, reanimated by barley and pain. Your muscles ache in places you didn't know you had. You stretch, wince, and reach for your morning mug. One sniff, and your suspicions are confirmed. The beer is even thinner today. Seti stomps in behind you, clearly already tasted his. It's official, he growls. We're being rationed down. But no one's saying it. You nod, staring into your brew like it's a muddy fortune teller. The heat's already rising. Giza doesn't believe in mornings. The sun just punches the sky open with both fists and dares you to sweat. You make your way to the worksite, past rows of men dragging ropes, smoothing stone, and swearing at shadows. Chisels ring out in rhythmic clinks. The pyramid looms in the distance, each layer a testament to muscle and mosquito bites. Today you're on corner finish duty, precision work. Your job is to make the blocks look elegant for the Pharaoh's eternal Instagram. It requires focus, steady hands, a stable mood. You have none of these things, especially not after lunch. Because lunch comes with another watery beer. And this time, there's a cue. You've never had to cue before. It's a quiet line, which makes it more ominous. Just the sound of bare feet shifting in the dust, ceramic mugs clinking softly, and one guy muttering about how the fish sauce yesterday had definitely gone off. You reach the front. The scribe doesn't even look up, just dips the ladle, pours, and waves you on. You eye the mug. It's not just thin, it's half full. You clear your throat. That's not the usual pour. The scribe still doesn't look up. Short supply today. Did the Nile run out? Seti calls from behind you, loud enough to draw glances. The scribe's stylus pauses. You don't like it? You can file a complaint with the foreman. A guy 3 spots behind whispers, "Yeah, let me just file that on my invisible papyrus." Another murmurs, "Maybe if we all chant real loud, Ra will descend and sort it out." It's funny, but not. There's a strange mood today. By mid-afternoon, the tension has become physical. Crews move slower, jokes land flatter, overseers shout more, and everyone pretends not to hear them. At one point, a foreman named Menenhotep, the same guy who once fined a man for sneezing near the sacred stone, goes on a tirade about lazy hands and lagging hearts. You're sanding the edge of a corner block when you hear the thud. A wooden mallet, flying through the air, crashes into a pile of chisels. Everyone freezes. A stonemason named Khufu stands nearby, panting, his face red with fury. "That was my mug," he snarls, "and it had nothing in it." One of the foremen starts to step forward, but hesitates. Khufu is enormous, also currently holding a backup hammer. Nobody moves. Even the donkeys go quiet. Then, just as suddenly, Khufu drops the hammer and walks away. Just walks, slow and steady, as if daring someone to stop him. No one does. Later that evening, you find out Khufu reported to the priests for a day of cleansing. Translation: he got sent to haul river mud while being spiritually shamed. You know it's a cover story. Nobody blames him. In fact, you quietly wish you had thrown the hammer first. Sidi leans over during dinner and whispers, "Next time we throw jars." You blink. "Empty ones?" He grins. "Only empty ones." The others laugh. It's a low, nervous chuckle that spreads fast. It's the kind of laugh people make when something that used to feel impossible suddenly doesn't. Even the old brewer's apprentice chuckles, covering his mouth. Later, as the moon rises and the tents rustle with soft snores, you lie awake on your mat, watching the shadow of a date palm flicker across the canvas. You remember when life was simpler, just hard work, decent beer, and bruises you could soak away with laughter. But now there's something underneath it all. The beer is weak, the mood is sour. The workers are watching each other closely. And the worst part? Nobody trusts the scribes anymore. Those guys with their smug ink pots and perfect robes, none of them are sweating. None of them are missing meals. And when someone asks about shortages, they look confused, offended even. But the vats haven't shrunk. The barley supply hasn't failed. So where's the beer? The whisper is everywhere now. Someone's skimming. And you? You're starting to think it's time to do something about it. The next day begins with silence, not peace. No, not that. The work site is just oddly quiet. Too quiet for a place where hundreds of men usually grunt, shout, and argue about whose shift it is to haul the rope. You notice it as soon as you arrive. Fewer curses, fewer songs, fewer footsteps even. The rhythm of the camp has changed, like someone cut the drumbeat of the day in half. Seti leans in and murmurs, "They're holding back." You nod slowly. You can feel it too. The way guys are dragging their feet just a little more. The way the stones move just slightly slower up the ramps. It's subtle, barely, but it's coordinated, and it's deliberate. At lunch, the line for beer stretches again. The scribe looks extra smug today. You suspect he likes the power, likes watching workers take their half portion, like good little beetles in the Pharaoh's hive. When you reach the front, you hold up your mug. He pours, doesn't look up, and says, "Same ration, short supply." You don't move, you look him dead in the eye. Then explain how the priests had a festival last night with jugs full of ale. That gets him. His stylus hesitates. Seti, behind you, adds helpfully, "I heard they toasted to the ever-flowing generosity of the Nile." Funny how generous it was after dark. The scribe still doesn't speak, but he doesn't pour any more either. You return to your crew with half a mug and a full mind. The beer, as usual, tastes weak and bitter, but something about this particular bitterness lingers in your throat. The kind that can't be quenched. That night, around the fire pit, you start doing what humans have always done when life turns sour. You joke. "How many scribes does it take to steal a pint?" Seti begins. "None," you reply. "They just write themselves a full ration and call it divine will." There's laughter. Real belly-deep laughter. Then Airi speaks up. "You know they used to pay builders at Saqqara with honey cakes?" "No way," someone says. "It's true," Airi says. Then one day they ran out. Said the bees were lazy. Next thing you know, the builders refused to show up. They got punished. They got respected, Airi says with a wink. Pharaoh's tomb doesn't build itself. The fire crackles. You sit in the flickering glow, the shadows painting everyone's faces in gold and charcoal. And slowly, the joking fades into a kind of quiet agreement. Nobody says strike. That word is too modern, too sharp. But phrases like, "What if we all just stopped," start floating through the night air. Seti rubs his beard. "If we did, how would we do it? Can't exactly tweet about it." You grin. Word of mouth. Workers talk. Ramps whisper. Someone suggests a signal. Another suggests everyone wear empty ladles around their necks instead of belts. A third says, "Why not just hold the mugs up?" Quiet protest. A toast with nothing in it. That sticks. A silent toast. A line of workers raising empty mugs in unison. That's poetry. And that's how revolutions ferment, in low firelight, between bites of flatbread, under a sky so ancient even the stars look bored. The next day, something changes. At first, it's just the rope team that moves slower. Then the chisel crew stops humming. Then the ramp boys start showing up late. Not enough to get punished, just enough to make things awkward. By midday, everyone's heard the phrase, "Don't raise your hands, raise your mug." Even the brewers hear it. And while they don't say anything, the apprentice gives you a sly thumbs up when he passes your tent. The priests notice too. You spot them pacing more, muttering. Their prayers are louder, more desperate, like they're trying to drown out the growing silence of the workers. And in all this, the beer keeps thinning. You wonder if it's deliberate now. A warning? A punishment? Or maybe it's fear. Maybe they're saving the good stuff for themselves, afraid the barley won't stretch if the workers revolt. Either way, it doesn't matter, because the empty mugs are coming. And you, friend, are going to be right there in the front row, holding yours high, smiling softly, and saying absolutely nothing. Just a toast to the gods, with nothing in your cup. You don't sleep much that night. The camp is restless, not with noise, but with a kind of quiet that presses against your chest like sand-filled linen. No one talks loudly, no one laughs, just the soft clink of ceramic, the occasional creak of rope, and footsteps. So many footsteps, pacing in the dark. You roll onto your side and stare at the ceiling of your tent, tracing a crack that looks suspiciously like a bird in flight. Seti snores nearby, and someone is muttering a prayer 2 tents over. Tomorrow it begins. At dawn, you stand with your crew just outside the mess tent. You're all there. Seti, Airi, the rope gang, the chisel team. Even that guy who always fakes ankle pain and smells like garlic. Each of you has a mug strapped to your belt, upside down. It's not dramatic, it's not loud, but it's visible. The overseer, Menenhotep, squints from a distance. He tilts his head like a confused jackal, then calls out, "Where are your ladles?" Seti raises his upside-down mug silently. The others follow. You lift yours last. It sways gently in the morning breeze. Menenhotep's nostrils flare. This a joke? Someone near the back mutters, "No beer, no bricks." You brace yourself for shouting, for lashes, but Menenhotep doesn't respond. He just turns and storms off, his sandals slapping the dust in angry rhythm. You exchange glances with Seti. That wasn't expected. Then it spreads. By noon, nearly half the workers across Giza are doing it. Upside-down mugs, silent faces. Work continues, but just barely. The blocks move like slugs. Chisels hit slightly offbeat. No songs are sung. And then, the scribes take notice. That afternoon, you spot one of them. Tehuti, a tall man with a shaved head and way too much eyeliner, standing on a sandstone rise, arms crossed. He's scribbling furiously onto a scroll, glancing back and forth between your crew and the ramps. Think he's writing poetry? Seti whispers. Only if it rhymes with panic, you reply. But here's where it gets really interesting. After the shift, you decide to take a little stroll past the scribe station. You and Seti wander nearby, pretending to argue about garlic rations. Nothing suspicious, and that's when you see them. The secret ledgers. Not the ration logs everyone sees, the public scrolls scribes wave around to prove your beer portions were accurate. These are different, smaller, tighter handwriting, stashed inside reed baskets beside jars marked with strange symbols you've never seen before. You nudge Seti and tilt your head toward the basket. "That's our missing beer," you murmur. "Or our missing truth," he says. You move on before anyone gets suspicious, but your heart is thudding like a mallet hitting soft clay. That night, you call a quiet meeting behind the granary. It's dangerous. Unauthorized gatherings are frowned upon. But at this point, nobody's playing by the old rules. Seti speaks first. "They're tracking more than rations. They're tracking reactions," Irie adds. "They knew we were unhappy before we flipped the mugs." Someone else says, "So they're watching us, rationing us, and hiding the real supply?" You all nod. Then you say it. "It's time we stop walking alone. We need a pact." Silence. Then, "A beer pact." Soft chuckles. "But you're serious." "Tomorrow, same time, all crews, we stop for 1 hour, just an hour. No blocks, no hauling, just mugs in the air. And if they come after us, we hold up our empty mugs. We don't shout. We don't fight. We show them what we've been given." The group disperses quietly, but you can feel it, the momentum, like a current under the Nile. The next morning, it happens. At precisely mid-morning, right as the sun crests and the overseers start barking about quotas, you and your crew set down your ropes. You reach for your mug and hold it aloft, empty. Then Seti, then Irie, then the entire ramp crew. Then across the compound, you see another group do it, and another, and another. Hundreds of upside-down mugs in the morning light, each one a quiet accusation, a prayer for fairness, a symbol of dignity wrapped in clay and dust. No words, no violence, just workers refusing. For 1 hour, the Giza worksite stalls like a broken chisel. The overseers panic. One tries to yell and trips over a stone. A scribe drops his scroll and scrambles to pick it up as if it might explode. Priests rush into the square, their robes billowing like frightened pigeons. You smile, quietly, because for the first time, They don't know what to do. And you finally do. As we continue to dig deeper into the dark legacy of the witch hunts, it's time to focus on perhaps the most chilling and brutal aspect of the entire phenomenon: the use of torture to extract confessions. Imagine for a moment that you're in a cold, stone-walled chamber, your hands bound tightly, the sharp scent of fear and sweat in the air. A question is asked. Are you a witch? The response is of little consequence, because whatever you say, whatever you do, there's one certainty: the pain is coming. It sounds like something straight out of a horror story, but this was medieval reality. When someone was accused of witchcraft, the presumption of guilt was nearly absolute. And if you were unlucky enough to be caught in the witch hunt machine, the methods used to prove your guilt would be truly horrifying. Torture, both physical and psychological, was the primary tool used to extract confessions. It was an almost standardized part of the trial process in many parts of Europe, especially in the early days of the witch hunts. Historians still argue about the sheer scale of torture during the witch hunts. Was it as widespread as the legends suggest, or were only certain regions and courts particularly brutal? What's certain is that the torture used during these trials wasn't just about extracting confessions. It was a form of societal control, a way of keeping fear alive. Torture was officially endorsed and legitimized by the church. In fact, it was often conducted under the supervision of ecclesiastical authorities, with the belief that extracting confessions from heretics or witches was necessary to save their souls. The types of torture employed were often designed to break the spirit as much as the body. One of the most infamous methods was the strappado, a form of suspension torture where the victim's hands were tied behind their back and they were hoisted off the ground by a rope tied to their wrists. This would dislocate their shoulders and cause excruciating pain. The logic behind this was simple. The more pain a person endured, the more likely they were to confess to witchcraft. Other forms of torture included the use of thumbscrews, the breaking wheel, and the witch's chair, which was specifically designed to keep the accused in agonizing positions. In some cases, the accused might even be burned or branded with hot irons to mark their guilt. And let's not forget about water torture, a horrifying test where the victim was either submerged in water or forced to drink an enormous amount. If they survived, it was deemed that they had made a pact with the devil to protect themselves. Perhaps the most insidious aspect of the torture wasn't even the physical pain. It was the psychological torment. The constant threat of torture, coupled with the endless questioning, would wear down even the most steadfast individual. Those who were tortured often came to believe that their suffering was a form of punishment for their supposed sins. In many cases, even those who were completely innocent eventually confessed to witchcraft, simply to stop the agony. Historians still debate whether these confessions were genuine or coerced. Were the accused witches truly guilty of practicing dark magic? Or were they simply trying to escape unbearable pain? The sad truth is that many of the confessions made during these trials were the result of sheer desperation, not because the accused had any knowledge of witchcraft. The nature of the confessions themselves often led to more trials, more executions, and more fear. Once a confession was made, the next step was to interrogate the accused further. Witches were often believed to have special knowledge of the devil and were thought to be able to cause harm to others through supernatural means. The confessions obtained through torture usually included elaborate stories about witches' supposed meetings with the devil, the use of magical ointments, or even the flying on broomsticks, which, believe it or not, was a common theme in many trials. These confessions were seen as proof of guilt, and they fed into the growing hysteria surrounding witchcraft. Once someone had confessed, their punishment was swift and severe. Execution, usually by burning, became the preferred method of dealing with convicted witches, as it was seen as a purification of their sinful soul. In some cases, however, hanging or drowning was used, depending on the region. The Malleus Maleficarum, the infamous witch-hunting manual, played a key role in legitimizing these practices. It not only instructed inquisitors on how to identify and interrogate witches, but it also provided guidelines for the appropriate punishments. The book essentially paved the way for a systematic approach to witch trials, and once it was published, the framework for conducting such trials became standardized across much of Europe. It was no longer just a matter of superstition. It was a legal process, with torture at its heart. And this isn't just a story about the past. It has echoes today. The legacy of these witch hunts can still be seen in how fear can so easily spiral into violence and injustice. The lessons from the past are hauntingly relevant, showing us the dangers of allowing fear and superstition to take control of society. As we look back at this horrific chapter of history, it's impossible not to wonder how something so cruel and unjust could have been accepted, let alone legitimized by both religious and secular authorities. But then again, this was a time when the line between religion and politics was thin, and fear of the unknown was the driving force behind many of society's darkest actions. We've already ventured through the brutal maze of accusations and torture, but now it's time to talk about perhaps the most tragic part of the witch hunts, the gender dynamics at play. While both men and women were accused of witchcraft, it's undeniable that women bore the brunt of the persecution. And here's the kicker. The very qualities that made women vulnerable were often the very things that made them essential to medieval society. Qualities like intuition, healing knowledge, and the role of caretaker. Imagine being a woman in medieval Europe. Your life was often one of deep labor, managing the household, taking care of the sick, and raising children. You weren't exactly in the spotlight unless something went terribly wrong. In fact, it was often the women who were most engaged with the community, midwives, healers, herbalists, who became the prime targets of suspicion. These women, armed with knowledge passed down from generations of women before them, were seen as too powerful, too knowledgeable about the world in ways that the church and political authorities couldn't control. And that, in a world where power was typically held by men, was dangerous. So, why were women so frequently accused of witchcraft? Historians still argue about the role gender played in these trials. Some argue that women, due to their role in domestic and reproductive life, were seen as closer to nature, and therefore, by association, closer to the supernatural. Others suggest that it was the religious and social structures of the time that saw women as inherently weak or susceptible to temptation, particularly to the devil. One thing is clear. Women were disproportionately targeted. In fact, it's estimated that between 70 to 80% of those executed during the witch hunts were women. The stereotype of the witch as an old, poor, and lonely woman wasn't just an accident. It was a constructed narrative, one that painted women who were independent, who stepped outside the norm, as threats to the established order. If a woman was outspoken, socially isolated, or simply didn't fit the mold of a compliant wife or mother, she became an ideal candidate for suspicion. And in a society where conformity was highly valued, any deviation was enough to send someone into the witch-hunting crosshairs. One of the most terrifying aspects of this gendered violence was the way it permeated all levels of society. The social order was largely patriarchal, and women were already on the lower rungs of that hierarchy. The witch hunts, then, became a way to reinforce that social order. It was a tool for reinforcing male dominance. The persecution of women wasn't just an accident of the times, it was a deeply ingrained system of control. By labeling women as witches, society ensured that they would remain in a subordinate position. Take, for example, the way midwives were treated. Midwifery was a female-dominated profession, one that had a deep connection to the natural world, particularly the mysterious process of birth. In a time when childbirth was a perilous and unpredictable process, midwives were revered for their knowledge, but their role also made them vulnerable to suspicion. If a woman died during childbirth, the midwife might be blamed for using dark magic, even if it was simply a tragic accident. The very act of helping women give birth, something that, in another time, would have been celebrated, was twisted into an accusation of witchcraft. Then there's the notion of the witches' Sabbat, or the gathering of witches. This idea, which became a central part of witch trials, painted women as not only witches, but as conspirators against Christian society. The image of the midnight gathering, where witches would supposedly meet with the devil, was often exaggerated and distorted. These gatherings were not just a symbol of defiance against the church. They were also a way to demonize women who dared to step outside the prescribed roles of wife and mother. Perhaps most frightening of all was the way the church and its authorities used witchcraft accusations as a tool to justify the subjugation of women. In the eyes of the church, women were seen as the weaker sex, more susceptible to the devil's temptations. This created a worldview in which women were inherently dangerous, particularly if they deviated from the norms. And it was the witch hunts that institutionalized this perception, creating a feedback loop of fear, persecution, and violence. Interestingly, the witch hunts didn't just affect poor or isolated women, they also affected women of higher social standing. In some regions, noble women, especially those with power or land, became targets as well. These women were often accused of witchcraft not just for their association with magical practices, but for their very status. Power, after all, was a threat to the established order, especially if it wasn't controlled by men. The witch hunts, in a way, were a tool of social control, used to remind women of their place in a deeply patriarchal society. Historians are still left to wonder just how many of these women were victims of social pressures and existing gender biases rather than genuine witches. In many cases, they were simply outcasts, women who didn't conform, who weren't married, or who simply had a reputation for being different. And in a time when conformity was key to survival, that difference could mean death. As you reflect on this, it's important to remember that the legacy of gendered violence during the witch hunts didn't just fade away with the last witch trial. the ways in which women were marginalized, the roles they were expected to fulfill, and the consequences of stepping outside of those roles shaped centuries of women's history. The witch hunts were more than just a tragic chapter. They were a dark reflection of how deeply embedded social hierarchies and gender norms were in medieval society. As we dig further into the witch hunts, it's time to discuss one of the most infamous documents ever created in relation to these trials: the Malleus Maleficarum. You've probably heard of it before, that notorious witch hunter's Bible. But do you know just how much influence it had on the scale and scope of the witch hunts across Europe? This book didn't just provide guidelines for identifying witches, it was an entire system of thought, a blueprint that legitimized witch hunts on a massive scale. If you were accused of witchcraft, this was the manual that would be used to ensure your conviction. The Malleus Maleficarum was written by Heinrich Kramer and Jakob Sprenger, two inquisitors from the Holy Roman Empire, in 1486. It quickly became the go-to handbook for witch hunts throughout Europe, and its impact is still felt today. It wasn't just a book about witchcraft, it was a theological weapon, one that sanctioned extreme methods of torture and execution in the name of religious purity. But it did more than just outline the methods. It gave witches a specific, devilish identity that was impossible to escape. The book was written in a tone that mixed religious zeal with a chilling sense of certainty. It claimed that witches were real and that they posed an existential threat to Christian society. According to Kramer and Sprenger, witches didn't just dabble in magic, they were servants of the devil, using their dark powers to corrupt humanity, destroy crops, and even harm children. To the inquisitors, this was not a matter of superstition, it was a matter of life and death for the soul of Europe. Historians still argue about the long-term consequences of the Malleus Maleficarum. Some say it served as the primary blueprint for systematic witch hunts in Europe, fueling a panic that stretched far beyond the borders of the Holy Roman Empire. Others believe it was a product of its time, just one piece in the larger puzzle of religious and social control during the late Middle Ages and early Renaissance. But whatever its role, there's no denying that it gave witch hunts a sense of legitimacy that they might not have had otherwise. The most dangerous part of the Malleus Maleficarum was the way it presented witchcraft as a threat to the very fabric of society. The authors made the case that witches weren't just isolated individuals with strange powers. They were part of an organized, dark force working against Christianity. In essence, the book helped create the concept of the witch conspiracy, an idea that witches were working together, conducting rituals in secret, and even sacrificing children to the devil. This fear of organized evil made it easier for both religious and political authorities to justify brutal witch hunts. The book also solidified the idea that witches could be identified by certain tells, such as their appearance, behavior, or physical features. One of the most infamous characteristics described in the Malleus was the idea that witches had physical marks or marks on their bodies, what were known as devil's marks. These were believed to be spots or growths that witches supposedly received when they made a pact with the devil. The book encouraged witch hunters to search for these marks during trials, and many innocent women and men were subjected to this marking process, which often involved brutal torture. Once a person was found with a devil's mark, their fate was sealed. What's even more chilling about the Malleus Maleficarum was its open endorsement of torture as a necessary tool in the witch trials. The book explained in detail how torture could be used to extract confessions from accused witches. According to Kramer and Sprenger, torture wasn't a violation of Christian morals. It was an essential part of rooting out heresy. In their eyes, the pain inflicted upon the accused was justified because it allowed them to save the witch's soul by forcing them to confess. This belief laid the groundwork for the widespread use of torture in witch hunts across Europe. The sheer popularity of the Malleus Maleficarum is hard to overstate. It was widely read, and many inquisitors and witch hunters saw it as the definitive guide on how to identify, interrogate, and prosecute witches. The book was printed in multiple editions and became a staple reference in witch trials for over 200 years. Even when the witch craze started to slow down in the 17th century, the Malleus remained an influential document. Some historians argue that the book kept the fires of witch hunting burning long after other, more rational voices had begun to speak out against it. But despite its widespread influence, the Malleus Maleficarum wasn't universally accepted. Some critics of the witch hunts pointed out its logical flaws, and even church authorities at times denounced its extreme methods. In fact, some church officials began to push back against the growing witch craze, questioning the validity of the trials and calling for more rational investigations. Still, the book's impact remained undeniable. It shaped the witch hunts of the 16th and 17th centuries in ways that were often terrifyingly efficient. Interestingly, the Malleus also reinforced certain social and gendered views about women. As we've already discussed, women were disproportionately targeted in witch hunts, and the book helped solidify the stereotype of the witch as an older, unmarried woman. It framed witchcraft as something that was inherently feminine, reinforcing the belief that women were more susceptible to the devil's influence. This gendered bias not only justified the killing of women during the witch hunts, but also tied it to larger societal fears about female power and autonomy. Despite its dark legacy, the Malleus Maleficarum serves as a powerful reminder of the dangers of unchecked religious authority and fear-driven justice. It illustrates how easy it is for a society to descend into hysteria when superstition is allowed to rule the day. And it shows just how dangerous it can be when one group, whether religious, political, or otherwise, has the power to define truth. The consequences of that unchecked authority were disastrous, not only for the many innocent lives lost, but also for the culture of fear and suspicion that it helped create. Now that we've explored the terrifying influence of the Malleus Maleficarum, it's time to talk about one of the most iconic and well-documented witch hunts in European history: the Pendle Witch Trials. This case, which took place in 1612 in England, serves as a stark reminder of how deeply embedded witchcraft fears were, even in more modern times. And despite being hundreds of years old, the Pendle Witch Trials have become one of the most infamous witch hunts in history, echoing the paranoia and fear that defined so many trials throughout Europe. The Pendle Witch Trials are often remembered for their sheer absurdity, and yet the fear they stirred in the community was very real. Imagine yourself in this setting. England, early 1600s. You're living in a small rural community, far removed from the bustling cities, and rumors of witches begin to swirl around the local village. It's easy to see how such rumors could spread like wildfire, especially when an authority figure, like the local magistrate, begins to entertain them. That's exactly what happened in Pendle, where fear of witches reached a boiling point. In 1612, 12 people, 10 women and 2 men, were accused of witchcraft, and their trials would become notorious for their sheer spectacle and the way they seemed to feed off the collective paranoia of the time. The accused were said to have been involved in everything from causing storms to cursing people to death. The trials took place under the watchful eye of the powerful figures of the time, including the renowned witch hunter Thomas Potts, whose role in this trial cemented his legacy in history. The trials were deeply influenced by the church and the prevailing hysteria of the period, where fear of witches had spread well beyond rural England into cities like London. What makes the Pendle witch trials particularly chilling is that many of the accused were members of the same community. This wasn't some faraway witch hunt in a distant land. It was a local tragedy, and the fear of witchcraft had turned neighbors against each other. Much of the testimony against the accused was based on hearsay and superstition, and several of the women involved were elderly and poor, fitting the stereotypical image of the witch who lived on the margins of society. One particularly memorable figure in this trial was Alison Device, a 9-year-old girl who, after being questioned, became one of the star witnesses against her own family. Her testimony was a key piece in the conviction of her mother and other relatives, making her an involuntary pawn in the drama that would unfold. It's chilling to think about how easily children were manipulated during these times, encouraged to speak the truth in front of authorities, even when they didn't fully understand the gravity of what they were doing. The evidence presented in the Pendle witch trials was, to say the least, flimsy at best. Witnesses claimed to have seen the accused engage in witchcraft, but much of the testimony was based on mere rumor and suspicion. There was even the claim that one of the accused had a familiar, a demon in the shape of an animal that served the witch and aided in the dark magic. The familiars were one of the most absurd aspects of witchcraft accusations during this time, and yet they were taken very seriously by those involved in the trials. These supposed familiars were often described as animals like cats, dogs, or toads, and having one was considered concrete proof of witchcraft. The trials culminated in the execution of 10 of the accused witches, who were hanged, while one man, James Device, died in prison while awaiting trial. What's particularly haunting about this case is how many of the accused were older women, often marginalized and living on the outskirts of society. The age-old stereotype of the witch as a powerless, old woman, vulnerable to accusations simply because of her age and status, was tragically played out here. What's more, many of the accused, like Elizabeth Southerns, were simply suspected because of their social isolation and unorthodox behaviors. But there's something else that makes the Pendle witch trials so significant: the role of social class in the accusations. The people targeted for witchcraft were often the poor, those who had no means to defend themselves against the accusations, or those who were seen as inconvenient members of the community. At a time when social hierarchies were rigid, being an outsider, whether because of your age, status, or behavior, was enough to make you a prime target for suspicion. Historians continue to argue over the exact motivations behind the Pendle witch trials. Some see it as a product of the intense religious and social upheavals of the time. Others suggest that it was a way for authorities to assert control over a population already grappling with economic hardship and widespread uncertainty. With the rise of Puritanism and religious fervor, witch hunts like these were seen as essential for maintaining order in an increasingly unstable society. In this environment, accusations of witchcraft became both a tool of control and a way of asserting moral authority. Anyone who deviated from the norm, especially in rural areas, was an easy target. The Pendle witch trials are a reflection of the climate of fear that dominated so much of medieval and early modern Europe. These trials were a microcosm of the broader witch hunt hysteria, showing how quickly accusations could spiral out of control. Even though the Pendle trials were far from the largest or most notorious witch hunts in history, they serve as a vivid example of how fear, superstition, and social control intersected to destroy lives. The tragedy of the Pendle witch trials is a powerful reminder of the dangers of unchecked fear. Once again, we see how deeply superstitions and religious zeal could shape societal norms and lead to mass persecution. And, much like other witch hunts, this event left a legacy of trauma and fear that would take generations to overcome. Let's take a deep breath and step away from the terror of the trials themselves to look at the role of the devil in all this. We've already discussed how witchcraft was seen as a direct affront to Christianity, but the central role of the devil in shaping these beliefs is something that warrants its own exploration. After all, what is witchcraft without its dark master? The idea that witches were in league with the devil is one of the most enduring aspects of the witch hunts, and it's the key reason so many people were accused and convicted even when the evidence was completely absurd. In medieval and early modern Europe, the devil was not just a symbol of evil. He was considered an active and powerful force that could corrupt the souls of men and women alike. But it wasn't just about sin. The devil, as a figure, became a scapegoat for all kinds of societal ills. This is where witchcraft came in. Witches, who were believed to have made pacts with Satan, were seen as an immediate and existential threat to society. Not only did they allegedly possess supernatural powers, but they were also thought to be directly working against Christian society. And, of course, this notion of witches conspiring with the devil added an entirely new level of urgency to the witch hunts. The devil-worshipping witch archetype became central to how witchcraft was understood. The belief was that witches would engage in sabbaths, secret gatherings where they would invoke the devil, exchange allegiance to him, and perform all sorts of dark rituals. These rituals, often described as orgies or grotesque ceremonies, were thought to be deeply corrupting, aimed at defiling the body and soul and cementing the pact between the witch and the devil. What makes these stories so interesting is how deeply they shaped public opinion. Even those who had no real understanding of what witches did became convinced that this was an actual threat, that witches were a real part of an ongoing war between good and evil. Historians still argue whether the fear of Satan's influence was a product of Christian doctrine or something more organic to human nature. Some believe that the rise of Protestantism, with its intense focus on the devil and sin, fueled witch hysteria in a way that Catholicism did not. Others point to broader cultural factors, such as the widespread fear of disease and death in a harsh medieval world, which led people to seek out scapegoats. Wherever you stand on that debate, one thing is certain. The figure of the devil played a pivotal role in the way society viewed witchcraft. One of the most striking things about the devil's role in the witch hunts was how it tied into the idea of witchcraft as a conspiracy. The idea wasn't just that a witch was someone practicing forbidden magic, it was that witches were part of an organized network working directly for Satan. This belief gave witch hunts an even more terrifying dimension. They weren't just about catching individual witches, they were about rooting out a covert army of Satan's agents operating in the shadows. The more the devil was invoked, the more witches became part of an all-encompassing evil conspiracy that needed to be eradicated. The first time we see the true scale of the devil's army concept is in the work of early witch hunters, who believed that Satan could recruit vast numbers of witches to his cause. It was a sprawling network of evil women and men who were bent on bringing about the downfall of Christianity. The more the idea of witchcraft as a demonic conspiracy spread, the more it created a moral panic that transcended local fears. People began to believe that witches weren't just isolated individuals, they were a network, part of a dark, organized resistance to Christendom. This led to a sense of inescapable paranoia, where anyone could be a witch. The devil wasn't just in the details, he was everywhere, working through people who appeared to be ordinary. Interestingly, the intense fear of the devil also reflected a deep mistrust of the unknown. Medieval people had very little understanding of disease, mental illness, or any natural phenomena that might explain inexplicable events. When crops failed, when disease struck, when someone acted strangely, it was often easier to blame it on witchcraft than to search for real answers. The devil, as a tangible force of evil, offered an explanation for all the world's misfortunes. In this context, the devil was the perfect scapegoat. People didn't have the knowledge or the tools to understand things like contagion or illness, so it was easier to assume the devil was at work. This obsession with the devil's influence only deepened during the height of the witch hunts. The idea of a personal pact with Satan became central to the witchcraft trials. Witches weren't seen as independent agents. They were viewed as pawns in Satan's larger war on humanity. The Malleus Maleficarum actually outlined the process by which witches were thought to make their pact with the devil. The belief was that they would sign a literal contract, exchanging their souls for magical power, and that they would then be marked by the devil for his service. Historians often debate whether these ideas were purely the product of religious fervor or whether they reflected deeper social anxieties about the changes sweeping through Europe at the time. Some believe that the idea of witches making pacts with the devil was a response to the breakdown of traditional social orders. Others argue that the church's growing influence needed a powerful enemy to rally against, and the devil, in all his dark and corrupting power, was the perfect villain to center the fight on. What we see in the end is how deeply the fear of the devil and the concept of witchcraft became intertwined with everyday life. This fear was exploited and manipulated by authorities to control populations, creating a climate in which innocent people were accused, tortured, and executed. It's not just the witches who suffered in this dark time. The entire fabric of society was warped by the pervasive belief in the devil's power. And even as reason and science began to emerge, the devil's shadow remained a powerful force in medieval culture, lingering long after the witch hunts began to wane. You wake up the next morning with a strange sensation. It's not pain, it's not heat stroke, and miraculously, it's not thirst. It's respect. The camp is different. The whole Giza Plateau, really. The usual morning barking from overseers is quieter, more hesitant. Workers aren't dragging their feet, but they are walking taller. Even the donkeys seem smug, which is impressive for animals that routinely chew rope just to annoy you. You sit outside your tent, sipping what is now unmistakably proper beer. Rich, cloudy, barley-packed and fermented with the kind of care usually reserved for temple offerings. It settles in your belly like peace. Seti joins you, holding his own mug like it's made of gold. So, how long before they take it back? You shrug. Depends how scared they are. And oh, they are scared because word has gotten out. You see it in the panic of the priests who now shuffle by with forced smiles, blessing everything in sight, including your sandals. The one with the twitchy eye keeps saying, "Divine harmony has been restored," over and over like a prayer or a desperate public statement. And the vizier? He hasn't been seen since the keg cart rolled out. Rumor says he's in meetings. Big ones. Some say with Pharaoh himself. Some say he tried to spin the whole beer incident as a scheduled ceremonial gesture. Some say the scribes had to carve a report justifying it as seasonal morale enhancement. You don't care what they call it. You know what it was. A win. Still, you're cautious. Victories like this don't stay safe unless they're carved in stone. So when a junior scribe visits camp with a stylus and a nervous smile, you pay attention. He's clearly not here by choice. Sweat pools under his arms. His ink pot rattles like he's carrying bees. He finds Seti, unrolls a scroll and says, "We've been instructed to record the event for internal ledgers." Seti arches an eyebrow. Internal. Just a routine documentation, the scribe stammers. For supply adjustments, nothing political. You lean in. If it's nothing political, put it on public stone. The scribe blinks. Public. Seti smiles the way crocodiles smile. We want a tablet. A proper one. Carved by temple masons. Placed near the mess hall. The scribe swallows. I'll pass it along. He does. And somehow, miraculously, it works. By the end of the week, a team of carvers arrives. They wear neutral expressions and avoid eye contact. But they get to work. The result? A stone tablet set into the northern wall of the ration square. Freshly carved hieroglyphs, clean and unambiguous. By decree of his divine proxy and in accord with the sacred balance, the beer ration shall meet the volume and strength expected of a loyal laborer's cup. Brewmasters shall not dilute beyond what is customary. Breaches shall be investigated. Fairness shall be upheld. Praise to Maat. Praise to Pharaoh. Praise to the barley harvest. You read it 3 times. Seti, holding a steaming clay cup, whispers, "That's a law?" You nod. Close enough to one, Eri runs his fingers over the fresh carvings. Think it'll last? You grin. It's carved in stone. Isn't that the point? Word of the tablet spreads quickly. Crews come by to gawk. One guy tries to take a rubbing of it with wet linen, nearly ruining the ink drying at the base. You forgive him, sort of. But more than admiration, you notice something else. Caution. The scribes walk past the tablet with their eyes down. The priests bow politely near it, but never stop. The overseers suddenly become very interested in supporting morale. It's working. But make no mistake, they haven't forgotten what happened, and neither have you. You still carry a mug like a weapon, ceramic and silent, but undeniably powerful. And now, whenever the beer gets a little thin, you don't argue. You raise your mug, you tilt it gently. And that's all it takes. A few workers nearby follow suit. A scribe notices. And suddenly, the brewer's assistant comes rushing with a fresh batch. You don't need to strike again. Not yet. Because now, you have leverage, a symbol, a story. And stories last longer than temples. The tamarisk tree behind the mess tent has become your unofficial headquarters. It's crooked, scraggly, and sheds bark like a sunburn, but it throws just enough shade to feel sacred. You and Seti sit there often now, mugs in hand, talking less about blocks and more about what comes after. The story of the protest, the mugs, the march, the decree. It's grown into something bigger than any of you. It's become a legend in the making, passed in whispers between crews, told around fires, reenacted in jokes, sometimes even sung. One mason with a broken nose has turned it into a chant. He yells, "No beer!" And his crew replies, "No bricks!" Every time they shift a stone. You're not sure it'll catch on, but it's catchy. That afternoon, a junior scribe appears beneath the tamarisk. Different from the last one. Younger, thinner, and nervous in a way that suggests he's new to talking with anyone who owns tools instead of scrolls. He bows awkwardly, holding a reed basket filled with small garlic bulbs and a jug. You stare at the jug first. It's clearly marked with the same seal as the festival badge. Good stuff, no foam fakery here. The scribe clears his throat. The Vizier's office wishes to express continued gratitude for the crew's unwavering loyalty. Seti raises an eyebrow so hard it nearly escapes his forehead. The scribe places the basket on a flat stone and says, "These are discretionary additions to the ration list. A goodwill offering." You almost laugh. It's a bribe, a soft one, seasoned with olive oil and fear. But it's also something else. A signal. They want peace. And they know the easiest way to get it is through garlic and cold beer. You accept, of course. Politely. Strategically. Seti gives the scribe a clap on the back that almost knocks him over, and then the poor boy scurries away like he'd just traded with jackals. That evening, the crews gather again, under the tamarisk, of course. This time, there's no plan to strike, no protest to whisper about, just sharing. Stories. Cups passed around. Someone roasts onions. The air smells like barley and slow victory. Iris strums a single-stringed lute and sings a terrible song about mugs and Pharaoh's breath smelling like vinegar. Everyone laughs. It's all starting to feel normal. And that, strangely, scares you a little. Because victories fade, stories blur, and stone tablets don't always survive sandstorms or ambitious scribes with chisels. So you make a decision. You grab a shard of limestone from the quarry, flat, smooth, and just wide enough, and begin to carve. Nothing fancy, no poetic flourish. Just the names of your crew, a pair of mugs side by side, and the words, "We stopped, so the beer wouldn't." You plant it behind the tamarisk with a few stones around it. Not obvious, not sacred, just solid. Seti watches you finish, squinting. That's a bit dramatic. You shrug. Future workers need to know we were here, that we mattered. He nods slowly. You think they'll care? You smile. If the beer's good, maybe. Just then, a brewer walks by, tips his jug at you and says, "Next batch is thicker. Promise." You raise your mug and say nothing. That's the new ritual now. A toast without words. A reminder. A warning. A thank you. Under the tree, the last rays of sun stretch long and slow. The kind of light that makes everything look like a memory, even as it's happening. You sip your beer, close your eyes, and feel something settle inside you. Not pride, not relief, but something softer, peace. You don't see the stone tablet arrive. It just appears one morning, nestled between the mess hall and the brewer's tent, as if the desert birthed it in the night. It's taller than the last one, polished, official, gleaming under the sun like a beacon. Workers crowd around, murmuring, nudging each other. Even the quiet ones speak up today. Seti whistles low when he sees the carving. They actually did it. And they did. The decree from the vizier has been formally etched into public law. Not tucked away in a scribe's private scroll, not whispered by priests, not buried behind bureaucracy, but written in stone, in plain language, for everyone to see. Let it be known that laborers of Pharaoh, those who shape stone and raise eternity, shall be granted a just share of the brew. That beer shall flow in quantity and strength equal to their effort, and that no intermediary shall thin, withhold, or deceive under sacred seal. This decree holds beneath Maat's balance, and against it no scribal hand shall interfere. It's poetic, even a little beautiful, and it's real. The younger workers gather around, running their fingers over the symbols like they're tracing the future. One of them, barely old enough to lift a block, asks, "Does this mean they can't cheat us anymore?" You shrug. "They'll try. But now," Seti adds, "we can point to this and say, no, we remember. The priests are noticeably absent today. You spot a few watching from the shade, robes fluttering like suspicious flags. None of them speak, and none of them dare to walk past the tablet. It's too visible, too specific, too permanent." Later that evening, over garlic stew and perfectly brewed beer, Irie leans back and stares at the stars. "You think this'll last?" Seti chuckles. "Only if the next guy doesn't trip over his ego and break it." You laugh, but you feel the weight of it too. This is the kind of moment that history either forgets or distorts. One scribe with the wrong political alliances, and suddenly it was the pharaoh's generosity, not the workers' unity, that brought the decree. You've seen it before. Stories warped, names erased. That's why you gather the crew after dinner, return to the tablet, and start carving something of your own. Just a small symbol. Hidden near the base, tucked behind a decorative flourish. 2 mugs side by side. No words, no name. Just the mark of the ones who made it happen. Seti catches on first, then Irie. Soon the others are joining in, scratching initials, tiny barley glyphs, even stick figures. You half expect the priest to burst out from behind a pillar yelling, "Vandalism!" But none come. Not tonight. You sit back, wiping dust from your hands, and admire the marks. It's messy. It's crowded. It's yours. And it's more than decoration. It's insurance. Years from now, if someone tries to claim this tablet as divine charity, some curious soul might crouch down, trace those tiny carvings, and ask, who were these people? And maybe, just maybe, they'll find your story. You return to your tent, but you don't sleep yet. You sit outside under the stars, feet sore, mind restless. Across the worksite, the tablet gleams, catching the last moonlight, like a mirror for forgotten voices. You think of the scribes, the priests, the vizier, all of them scrambling to keep order, keep ceremony, keep their scrolls in line. But they forgot something important. You laid the stones. You built the ramps, moved the blocks, brewed the beer, hauled the god's house into the sky, one curse and chant at a time. Now, the law knows it too. Tomorrow things will go back to normal. Sort of. The beer will flow. The stones will rise. Pharaoh's tomb will inch closer to divine readiness. But you'll always know what it took. An empty mug, a silent walk, a stone tablet, and the courage to say, enough. Time, as it always does in Egypt, begins to blur. The sun rises, the stones stack, the chants echo across the quarry, and life slips back into its rhythmic grind. But not quite the same, not after the mugs. Something lingers in the air now, a subtle shift, like the way sand settles differently after a storm. The decree stands firm by the mess tent, now surrounded by small offerings, a dried barley stalk, a wedge of hard cheese, a lucky charm, shaped like a frog. You don't know who started the tradition, but it's caught on. The tablet has become a kind of shrine, not to Pharaoh or the gods, but to you, to labor, to dignity. And then, the stories start mutating. It's bound to happen. You knew it would, even while it's still fresh. At first, it's small. A brewer claims the protest was led by a one-eyed rope master with a voice like thunder. Another says the mugs weren't empty. They were on fire. Someone even swears they saw a worker levitate during the march. You roll your eyes, but Seti eats it up. Let them dream, he says, grinning. Makes the story last longer. One night, a traveling potter stops by camp. He's got cracked sandals, dustier skin than you've ever seen, and a gift, a clay jug with 2 tiny mugs carved into its side. Came from Saqqara, he says. They're telling your tale up there. Said the Brotherhood of the Dry Mug stood against Pharaoh's greed and were rewarded by the gods themselves. You blink. Brotherhood. Seti nearly chokes on his beer. Oh, we're a brotherhood now. The potter shrugs. They say the priests were terrified, that the Nile turned bitter until you all marched through fire and stone, that the gods themselves toasted your cause. You're speechless, amused, slightly alarmed, but mostly flattered. This is what happens to revolts that work. They become legends. You try to correct the potter, explain that there was no fire, no divine river souring, and certainly no levitation. He smiles, nods, and says, Sure. Of course. You know he doesn't believe you, but you also know that in some way, the exaggeration is helping. The story's legs are longer now. It's stretching past the walls of Giza, past the borders of your camp, past the lifespans of those who were there. And that's important. Because historians of the future, those scroll-hugging, ink-stained know-it-alls, will probably debate this moment forever. They'll argue about dates, about names, about whether any of it really happened. Some will say it was just a minor ration adjustment blown out of proportion by folk tales. Others will call it the first labor strike in recorded history, a turning point for working people, a barley-fueled rebellion that forced the powerful to listen. And then there will be the fringe scholars, the ones who swear the mugs were enchanted and that the Pharaoh himself appeared in a vision, begging for forgiveness. Let them argue. You're not here to win a debate. You're here to tell the truth the way it felt. Sunburned, exhausted, joyful, and full of foam. And so you tell it. To new recruits, to travelers, to anyone who listen while the beer's cold and the fire's crackling. You tell it not as a sermon, not as a prophecy, but as a bedtime story for the dusty, the tired, the ones who keep lifting even when no one's looking. Sometimes Seti joins in, adding his own embellishments. We were 20,000 strong, he says. The sky darkened when we lifted our mugs. You roll your eyes. We were 200, and it was just cloudy. Still, people laugh, and they listen. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you start wondering, what if legends are just truths that wore better clothes? At the end of one long day, as you sit on the ramp watching the sun turn the stone golden again, Irie leans beside you and says, Think they'll remember us? You don't look at him. Just sip your beer. If they don't, you say softly, they'll remember the mugs. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. The work slows as the seasons shift. The Nile begins its gentle rise, and the air turns thick with insects and incense. The priests call this a time of balance, of preparation for renewal. But for you and the other workers, it feels more like a long yawn at the end of a hot day. Your muscles ache less now, not because the stones got lighter, but because your spirit doesn't feel as heavy. There's something about being heard, really heard, that makes each load a little easier to carry. The mugs still clink each evening, now more full than not. The rations are consistent. Even the scribes act like humans instead of walking ink blots. A few have even learned names, not just numbers. A few have even asked questions about how you place the stones so precisely. You never thought you'd teach a scribe something, let alone see one listen. The tamarisk tree is quieter now. Fewer late-night meetings, fewer whispered plans. Just soft conversation and that comforting sound of beer being poured. One night, a younger worker, barely grown, with dust permanently streaking his cheeks, sits beside you and asks, "What happens when this is all done? When the pyramid's finished?" You don't answer right away. Instead, you look at the horizon. The sun is sinking low, painting the sand in gold in memory. You take a long sip from your mug, let the taste linger on your tongue. Then you say, "We'll build something else." "We always do." He nods, satisfied in that way only the young can be, and leans back against the tree. You feel the silence stretch out between you. Not awkward, but heavy with meaning. Around the camp, the other workers sit in their own little clusters. Some are laughing, some are singing, some just sit and breathe, grateful for stillness. It feels like peace, not the fake kind that priests chant about, but the real kind, born from struggle and mugs raised in quiet protest. Later that night, as you curl into your mat, your body finally relaxed, you let your thoughts drift. You imagine a time far from now, long after you're gone, when someone stumbles across a chipped mug buried in the sand. Maybe they pick it up, dust it off, and wonder why it was carved with barley and laughter. Maybe they ask who it belonged to. And maybe, just maybe, they'll dig a little deeper and find your story. Not the version with magical beer or flying donkeys, but the real one. The one where workers stood together, raised their mugs, and quietly, stubbornly changed the way power tasted. You smile as you close your eyes, because you know the truth now. The gods might live forever in stone, but you live forever in the pause between two sips of beer, in the quiet that follows a laugh, in the clay of the mug and the calluses on every hand that raised one. And in this version of eternity, there are no bricks to haul, no rations to count, no scribes to argue with. Just you, a soft breeze and a full mug that never runs dry. Wind down begins below. The fire crackles low, just a whisper now. You lie on your mat beneath the stars, your body warm, your breath steady. The sounds of the camp have softened into sleep. A donkey snorts once, then falls quiet. Someone laughs in their dreams. The desert breeze brushes past the tent flaps like a sigh. Even the tamarisk tree seems to exhale. The sand beneath you is cool, familiar, almost kind. You picture the pyramid rising in the distance, not as a burden anymore, but as a reminder that what you build, stone by stone, breath by breath, matters. And that even a mug of beer can hold the weight of justice. Your hands, once blistered, now rest open, loose, unworried. You've earned this quiet, this stillness, this small, simple peace. Above you, the stars blink, slow and sleepy. They don't rush. Neither should you. So let your breath deepen. Let your thoughts soften. Let the last image be a full cup, cool in your palm, and laughter on the wind. The hard work is over. You're off the clock. Sleep easy.